Hello, everyone. This is Jeff Foley with Paladin Financial, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Paladin Financial Talk. We've got an awesomer show today. To my right, my much better half, Nikki Foley, and to my further right, our now co-host, not remote host, Mr. Tony Shore.
Yeah.
Hello
yeah.
and hello. How do you do? How do you do?
We're all here crammed in the studio together. I like it. Togetherness, which is what we're talking about today, isn't it?
Oh, Tony, that was a great segue. We are talking about togetherness, and I think it's so appropriate that Jeff and I are here together because our whole month of July is focused on relationships. So we're going to continue our lifestyle series that we've been doing this summer, and relationships topic is on couples.
I have to comment first.
Couples.
Though, Tony, I like the relationship between you and Speed Stick, by the way. Compliments. Compliments.
Oh, so bad.
Wow, I don't even know. I assume you're talking about deodorant, but I don't know. It is interesting that you two are here, and we're talking about couples, how appropriate to have you both here. But I was looking at this checklist for successful relationships for couples,
Ooh.
and it says things you want to avoid. The first was working together.
Check.
Okay.
This is one of the best 6 months of my life.
What was the second one? Yeah, it was, and it just, I went and got, no, Jeff and Nikki do that, and they do that, and having kids, you shouldn't have kids. That was a bad one. So you guys have, the first two were don't have kids and don't work together. I'm kidding. Of course you want to have children. That strengthens a lot of relationships. I know it has for my wife and I, and for you as well. We all love our families, but I had to give you a hard time since you two have worked together for so long.
Yes.
We have. I started my career just over 20 years ago, and Jeff Foley was my first boss that I ever had.
Wow.
How about that? Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And then we worked together for close to 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Took a short break in there, and back together the last 6 months. So
Yeah.
it's been good.
Here we go.
Like I said, I think it's been the best 6 months of my life being back together, working right next to each other.
Oh, yeah. Now you
Is that
work
in the
closely
script?
together,
Is that in the
Nikki.
script?
You're running the show down there now. How long was Jeff your boss, though? How long was that time
Probably
period?
only about a year.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And since that time, you've been his boss. So that's.
Yes, indeed. I'll just go with that one. We should just dive right in and leave it at that. We don't want anything to contradict that, not at all.
Well, it is funny that you two work together and you make it work so well. But at my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, and I think I've told Jeff this before, maybe our listeners, but people said, my mom and dad were sitting there, and all these people were coming up, and they said, 50 years, you've been married. How did you do it? What's your secret? And my mom just seriously said, he's gone a lot. He's an over-the-road truck driver. I don't know if there was any hint of kidding. Everyone laughed though, and I'll never forget her saying that. And my dad just smiled, of course. So, but that's a fun little fact. But you guys make it work. I think that's awesome. And you've worked together for so long, and both in the financial industry. So that's awesome.
I'll tell you a little story. You talked about your parents' 50th wedding anniversary. So my grandparents, the fall that we got married, celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary, and it was within a month of us getting married. And Jeff reminds me a lot of my granddad, and part of the reason that I picked him. So I think we have 60 good years potentially together. I don't know if we'll ever live that long, but
as Jeff laughs nervously, I like that. The nervous laugh. Okay, so couple relationships. Where do you want to begin, Nikki?
Let's just talk about relationships in general.
Okay.
And there is plenty of research out there that gives importance to relationships and how they are a key to emotional, physical well-being, and especially as you are aging. Jeff is itching to say something funny, but I'm going to keep going here. I'm not going to let him. And
the moment's passed, but I'll throw it in there anyway. I was going to say, you remind me of my grandfather as well.
Oh, Jeff Foley. I'm going to get us back on track with relationships for just a moment here. And it's personal relationships that are the secret to long, healthy, happy lives. In fact, there was a statistic out there that I looked up when I was doing a quick, research or just on the topic. And they said that you're 50% more likely to die prematurely if you don't have a healthy relationship with you. I mean, that's a pretty startling statistic.
That's huge.
And it is as unhealthy as smoking if you do not have a strong personal relationship around you.
Wow.
So that's the critical nature of what we're talking about today.
That's awesome. So, yeah, it has to do with longevity, and that's how it ties into retirement. And retirement planning is, you always say have a purpose, but also have a friend, the way it sounds. It's I know that happens a lot when couples are married for so long and then one passes, and usually the other isn't too far behind, even when they're not that ill before that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Having that strong social networks, they say, reduces depression, reduces, lower blood pressure, like real things that impact, the health of somebody. And so I agree with that.
Yeah.
So today's relationship conversation is about couples, and more specifically, couples who communicate are likely to have this healthy relationship and so forth. So meaning they expect to live a comfortable life in retirement if they can communicate. They're expected to rate their overall financial health of their household as excellent or very good if they can communicate. And finally, they say that money is not their greatest relationship challenge if they can communicate. And so that is what we're going to do today, Mr. Jeff Foley.
Oh my gosh.
We are going to communicate together, and we're going to have a little bit of fun, and I believe this is going to be fun. Okay.
There's a line from a song that reminds me, we're going to communicate, Jeff Foley. There's a line from a song that says, I love my wife, she tells me so.
So, Jeff, I'm going to make a couple of requests from you today to participate, but let's start with this. So when we got married, I remember us discussing, some big things. Where do we want to live? Do we want to have kids? Some of those critical things as we make that decision. Fair?
Yep.
Okay. When we bought a house, we talked, I don't know if you remember doing this, but we made a list of all the things that were important to us with the house, and like garages and fences and things of that nature. So we communicated.
I think there was a spreadsheet involved.
It might have been a spreadsheet. Definitely was a spreadsheet. Yep. And then when we had kids, another big life decision, we talked about general philosophy on raising them and educational goals and things of that nature. Fair?
Yep.
What we haven't got to yet is retirement. So let's just play a little game and ask some questions of one another and communicate about retirement.
Okay,
so I'll ask the first question here, and then you can ask some of me. Does that sound fair?
Fair.
Okay. First question. What do you want to do in retirement, Jeff Foley?
I need to check with my wife first. I don't know. Honestly, mixed thoughts on it. On the one hand, I enjoy working, like what I do. So in that sense, a lot of advisors that get into retirement years, they never really retire. They kind of scale down over time, and because they enjoy it and like working with their clients, I could see that being a possibility. But I could also see, hey, I'm going to hang up the cleats and just completely relax. But I would think I'd probably do something, and it would be in what we do now. I can't see myself doing something different.
I'll go along with that. I love the people aspect of what we do and helping people as they transition into retirement and through retirement, being able to not have that stress of giving it to somebody else, giving it to the Paladin Financial team so that they don't have to worry about that aspect. And so the people side of it, I don't want to ever give that up. And so if it means we're in our existing business, but the people side is important important for me. I think we both agree travel would be something we'd like to see more of as the kids move out of the house and we have more time. So I would put travel in that category.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I thought you meant when you asked the question work related, but I failed there.
No.
Yeah, it's an important question to think through of what, if you're a couple, what do you want that to look like? There are a lot of different approaches, and how do you phase into that potentially over time? You know, sometimes people retire earlier than their spouse, and the first person adjusts to retirement, and then they have to readjust when the second person retires, or do you do it at the same time? So that's an important one.
Absolutely, and I think the point is we don't necessarily have to agree on what every day looks like, but I do think that it's an important piece to have a financial plan and that your finances can accommodate and support both desires, and I think that's an important piece to know it's in place along the way.
Begin with the end in mind and make sure you can support that. Yeah.
Who said begin with the end in mind? What famous person?
Escapes me.
Stephen Covey.
Oh, okay.
One of my favorites.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I'm a longtime Franklin Covey user, and
Yes.
so that's the only reason I know that.
I was just going to say Franklin Covey.
Oh, yes. Did you know, Jeff, there is a Fidelity investment survey out there, and it said 50% of couples report being misaligned about when to retire and how much savings is needed. And so, as we brought this back to the financial side of things, again, in the communication, all key pieces. Jeff Foley, another question, and you already answered this one for the most part, but when are you going to retire?
Yeah, I don't have an age in mind, and a timeline if it's by this date. So no, probably a phased thing over time, and spend more time on where I want to spend and how I feel I can add the most value. So
if you stay healthy, you probably want to keep going.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You seem to be the type of people who could, it'll be hard for you to completely let go.
If you listen to our past couple episodes, it gives you an insight on how to stay healthy with your nutrition and your fitness. So just in case you wanted to go back and have a few tips.
Add that to my to-do list.
Yep.
I think we have the benefit of working together, and so the question of when you're going to retire, we have so much in sync with each other that maybe isn't as pressing for us because every day is together already, and it just starts to, I think, evolve.
How about for you? What's your answer?
I'll just do what you do, Jeff.
No.
Just wherever you go, I will go.
Alex.
Is there another song like wherever you go, wherever you go, I will go?
Yep. Yeah. Well, I think that you two have a real advantage in that you run your own company together, so you work together, you do that together. So retirement, as far as when you retire, isn't going to need as much planning and affect finances as much as a lot of our listeners, like my wife and I, completely separate careers, separate companies, and separate ages, and probably separate goals there. So I noticed that was really hard for our good friends who are our neighbors, because he's much older than her in the first place, and she was pretty much already retired to stay at home, and he was working, so they had to coordinate. The cost of health benefits come in, and a lot of factors come in that you actually need a financial advisor for when it comes to figuring out when you can retire, because if one of you isn't working or is younger and can't qualify for Medicare, so many factors come in, don't they?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think you did a good job, Tony, of summarizing some of those financial considerations and some of the emotional stressors that can go along with that question of when. Okay, you want to give me one, or do you want me to keep going?
Question number 3. Where do you want to live in retirement?
I need this to be a hybrid answer. I want to maintain Minnesota, primary, being here. I don't want to follow the kids. That may change because I don't think that the kids should have the burden of if we were to follow them and then they choose to go somewhere else. I don't want that to be an emotional stressor for them. So I think that it needs to be we maintain roots here. I would like and I think you already know what I'm going to say, I would love to have somewhere North Carolina, South Carolina, if we could. It could be temporary, but I think that's a place that has a really warm spot for me. And the third thing to consider is I think it would be so much fun to go and live different places for 6 months and live like a local, and then you go to the next place and live like a local.
Tony, I'm going to survive to live another round here because I agree with all of this.
Wow,
Look
at you.
We didn't talk about this before.
I had my finger on the buzzer for what you were gonna for when
I
Jeff
get
piped
$200
in.
for pass and go.
Yeah. No, that sounds great. I will say that when your kids leave college and then start exiting college, at the point where your first child graduates from college or gets married, then you might change your mind about wanting to be near the kids, and especially if they get to the point of grandkids. So I think things can change over time, but it sounds like you're both on the same page there. I like that.
Yeah.
Like, clarification, I will want to be with our kids every second. I just don't ever want the burden on them
Yes.
to feel like they have to stay put for us. So
I think that's good.
time will tell on that one.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Me again or you?
All right, for you, what roles and responsibilities do you want if a long-term care event happens?
Okay. This is probably one of my favorite questions to ask our clients is, do they have some opinion, thought related to a long-term care experience? What do they want that to look like?
So if Jeff needed long-term care, I think he's asking is the question, Nikki, how would you want to handle that?
Absolutely. Do you know how I'm going to answer this?
No.
Okay. I think I'd be fantastic in a 55 plus community. I would thrive because there'd be tons of people around. There'd be tons of activities. I could be the activities director. I feel like I'd love it so much. So I am great being in a facility if that's what's needed.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
You too?
Yeah, over time. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like this is a question that so many have experiences on, and I think maybe we've even talked about this in a previous episode, that there's something that has molded their opinion, whether it's a parent or a grandparent or some situation, and I think that they have an opinion, but what I find, and I think you would agree with this, oftentimes they don't want to discuss it. It's that topic that they haven't brought up with their spouse. They don't want to discuss, they don't want to discuss it, and so it goes uncommunicated. I was having dinner last night with two gals that I've known probably for the last 10 years, and the one had her father was diagnosed with early onset dementia, and it was 14 years that he lived with that diagnosis.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and so very hard.
That's tough.
And he was, they were farmers, they were Iowa people, and his mentality, both probably generational and, how he was brought up, was do not put me in a facility. If you have to put me in a facility, we're done. And so they did a very long stint of those 14 years having him at home. And at some point you get to, where her mom couldn't care for him in the way that she needed to. And so they did do a facility. But what I thought was interesting is she, who, she's almost 50, has a plan for her long-term care that she's communicated with her husband, and it's very specific because of that experience that she's been through. And most don't take time to communicate it or to decide in that much specifics on what it looks like. But I think it's such a critical one, and it's a critical one from a financial aspect and an emotional aspect.
We should, and I'm sure there are things like this out there, but we should come up with a list of 20 questions to think about as it relates to this topic that people can chew on and think about. That might be another episode as it relates to long-term care and aging. Do you want in-home or a community, and thinking through some of those things so it's not a surprise and you have time to adapt to the other person's opinion on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my answer is put me with the people. I'm ready.
Yeah. And it makes a difference too. Now there's some really good facilities out there, and senior living and assisted living and memory care facilities. It is hard, I think, for when the family tries to do it on their own. I think that's great. In-home is good, but if it's extended like that, that's a real tough situation.
Yeah.
And it has to be a financially prepared for decision as well, and that's the part that you have to have time on your side. You know, Tony, you say there's really nice ones out there. Well, with nice ones come the dollar signs and
Yep.
the experiences that you think that you want. The next question is, can you afford, and being prepared for that.
In your family, Tony, I know you've had longevity in your family. Is that something that was talked about or just happened along the way as far as care considerations?
You know, it is something that's been talked about a bit, because I've had many, on my father's side, I've had many aunts, uncles, and grandparents that have lived into their 100s.
That's incredible.
So there is longevity. My grandfather died at 101, but about almost a year ago now. But he was active up until 2 months prior to his death.
Just incredible.
He was camping at a campground in his camper 2 months before he passed.
Wow.
At 101. So there is longevity there, and they have talked about that. He fortunately he outlived his first 2 wives. They passed, and then another neighbor lady, her husband died, who was a friend of the family's. She moved in to take care of him and help him there around the house, and so he always had somebody there. And I remember when my grandmother, his wife, my dad's mom, passed away, she had dementia, and he had her there and he cared for her and lifted her in and out and took her to the restroom, did everything. So you have to have the right person, and everybody's different, but they did plan for it somewhat. They planned for longevity, which is good, since they had it. So now both my mom's in her 70s, but she has Parkinson's, so she's already in a home, and luckily she likes it there because my dad can't take care of her anymore. He can't lift her in and out because he's somewhat disabled, and he's 80. So she has to be there, but fortunately there was a great facility, and it's actually not an ultra expensive one, and she's getting great care. So that's good. Now my dad is in that situation where he's a farmer. He wants to stay on the farm. It's the farm where my grandfather grew up, who was 101. It's the farm where my dad grew up, because there's 2 houses, and I grew up on that farm. And it was homesteaded by the Shore family in the 1800s. So we're trying to keep the farm, and not have to use it to pay for mom's care. So you need a plan in place when you're dealing with all these moving parts, and people don't realize it. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, it's not just said this before, but it's not just the financial component that has to be considered and addressed, but it's the emotional component and difference of opinions potentially that come up.
Yeah.
Here's where I'm going to make a request, not of you, Jeff Foley, but of our listeners, that if anything, of anything that's talked about today, make the action related to this long-term care discussion as the priority. Is say something so that there's some communication between you as a couple or your kids of what do you want this to look like.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be perfect, but starting the conversation is the key.
Yeah.
Okay, Jeff, I'm coming back to you here.
All right.
So, to enjoy retirement with me, it would only make sense based on this last conversation to have an overall financial plan. Would you agree?
Financial plan. That sounds like a dandy idea.
Did you just ask a financial advisor if he...
Oh, I did. And that's why I took this one. So, would we all agree that a financial plan is a good idea?
Yes.
So good, though. Listen to this. 35% of couples actively engage in retirement planning together. That's it.
Yeesh.
35%. That's an extremely low number.
Yeah.
And so what an opportunity, again, comes back to communication. And I know that Jeff and I will laugh from time to time that maybe we over communicate, and we grow up in an environment and with mentors who were communicators, but that is not the standard. That is not the norm. And so taking time to at least start some of the conversations related to these are important.
We see that. I would agree with the stats. It's very low, but we see that a lot with couples that come in and meet with us for the first time, and there's usually one person, might be the husband, might be the wife, depends on the relationship, that's the the person that takes care of the stuff, the money and investments and whatnot, and the other person does their thing. And usually that, I don't know if delegation is the right word, but that you're going to handle this bucket, there's not a lot of communication that occurs around that, and the other person doesn't know what's going on as much and has oftentimes doesn't have an opinion or has that opinion suppressed. So that's, I think, an important one to get that conversation out there. And that's a good thing in working with a good financial advisor, is that brings both people's opinions to the table to work through some of these things. It's not just one person's retirement, it's both.
And I think as people move into retirement, that's where it becomes even more critical that they've survived most of their life and 40 some years potentially together without having to have critical conversations. But as soon as you move into that environment where you're on that fixed salary, or that you have a fixed set of resources that you're using, and you have to have that that 10, 20, 30 years of using those resources, it becomes critical that you have the conversations and are on the same page.
Yeah, good.
Okay, how about this one? This is where it gets to be a little bit more technical, and probably even less common that these things are talked about, is how much risk are you willing to take, and what are some of the things that you value related to the financial side of things. But risk, people might not have any idea. So navigate that a little bit for us, Jeff. You probably have plenty of stories that can support what this actually means.
Yeah, I think risk is a relative term. For some people, having a third of an account in the market, a third of their investments in the market freaks them out, and they want CDs and annuities and complete safety, and they're decreasing the market risk that they have, but they're accepting a different type of risk that they might not keep pace with inflation over time. And then there are others that are full board in the market, and they keep as little money in safer things, and they're comfortable with the market risk. But you're in a situation potentially where if you're creating income in retirement, you're locking in losses potentially if the market's down, or we have a year like last year, 2022, stocks were down and bonds were down, and you're pulling money out, you're going to lock in a loss no matter what. So I think it's a relative term, and understanding how people are comfortable. If one person's been the handler for 30, 40 years of their relationship, and now all of a sudden the other person's opinion is brought in, and one's more aggressive and one more conservative, we have to weave through that and make sure it's a good plan that makes sense. You're compromising like in anything else with that, so that if we have a year like last year, one person isn't freaking out and the other one feels like they have to justify what they did.
Absolutely. I think that goes back to, maybe you started this, but somewhat financial intelligence, that one person usually takes a lead because of interest or whatever it might be. And so risk can even, the terminology of risk can even broaden beyond market risk, but risk of having debt, risk of unexpected expenses, just like the everyday application of risk, and knowing where your partner or your spouse views that as a couple. Those are really important, back to kind of your limited resources. And so broadening that definition of risk beyond market risk is, I think, important, focusing on your budget. And I'll go to a story. I'm not going to name people here, but in the practical application, in some of the things that I have seen among couples, is both individuals may be retired, recognizing that there is a limited resources there. One continues to work, some part-time, because they want to be able to spend. They want to buy things for their grandkids. They may want a new car. They may want granite counters. They may want a new refrigerator. And it leaves the other one who isn't working part-time, who is at home, not understanding, because they're very comfortable in their environment. And there's this practical thing that happens among couples of one chooses to work part-time because they still want the lifestyle that they knew and they could spend, and the other one doesn't. And all of a sudden you have this level of friction of, I don't understand why they are buying all the things for the grandkids, or we don't need a new refrigerator, the one still works from 30 years ago, and so forth.
Yeah,
so I think
there's a number of money issues that come up with that. As one, we've worked with people where one person continues to work because they don't want the other person to have any control or say over how they're spending their money. So getting those conversations out on the table and addressing that stuff over time is important. It's not going to
Communication is the key, isn't it?
That's right.
Really, to all of this.
Oh, absolutely. The other C you used a second ago was compromise. It's not black and white on so much of this, and you have to be willing to put your compromise hat on and communicate.
I want to be right, but I also want to live.
Right.
How do we
Just-
respond to that?
Wow.
Very profound.
All
I wasn't
right,
quite
yeah.
sure what to say on that.
Yeah, I wasn't either. I almost gave him the on that, but it was a good. I think it was good, so I can't do that. Well, you know what? We should probably wrap up the show. So I think it's been a great discussion. Communicate, compromise, the two big C's.
I like that.
You know, C is and also cookie. C is for cookie.
Cookie.
C is for cookie. We know that.
Well, I think that we could continue going on and on with these questions, but I do agree to wrap up is important here. But I'd say as we end this, and Tony, summarize there, is choose one of these topics. I'm going to suggest that long-term care one, but there's maybe another one that spoke to our listeners. Choose one and put yourself out there and start that communication conversation.
Maybe we could have a part 2.
I'm great with part 2.
I
That
think
means I
we
get to
should.
spend more time with you.
No.
Oh, that's awesome.
We need some cliffhanger music, Tony.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any cliffhanger music. I mean, that's crazy. I don't even have. Oh,
Whoa.
what happens next week?
So good. So good.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you guys for another great episode. I always enjoy spending time with you both. And that's another wrap on the Paladin Financial Talk.
Thank you. Thank you.